Hello and welcome to another episode of What Should I Watch? Today I'll be talking about I Came By, a brand new original Netflix thriller that I highly recommend that you should watch. Stick around to find out why. I Came By is an incredibly solid thriller. Whilst the plot does have different sort of avenues within it, it's not a huge gargantuan storyline. The way that I would kind of differentiate it from an alternative film, perhaps Hollywood, is that the scale and the setting is much more reduced in comparison to a sort of large blockbuster film. And what I mean by that is that the story is told through a small cast, and the story revolves around a film world that is smaller than what we're perhaps more used to with the expansive budgets and CGI and graphics and things. There's a massive benefit from making a film like this, but there's also a negative that may come from it. The negative is that if your storytelling or your acting is weak, it fails to build on the premise of the plot, and the subplots become a bit more meaningless, and ultimately the film falls flat. Now, yeah, that can be said with any film, but if you have scale and you have visuals and you have action and excitement, it sometimes can cover up more cracks than in comparison to a film that is revolving around a smaller film world or universe. And I think when it pays off really well because you invest yourself in the story, you invest yourself in the characters, and it ultimately makes the film much more impactful. So that's why this film's really good, because that all those things happen, all the marks are hit. I was surprised to see on Rotten Tomatoes that the rating is only about 6 to 8%. I thought that was quite interesting based on the fact that the film is such a great story. Like, for me personally, that's what I base it off on. Like, does it leave me thinking afterwards? Has it left me entertained? Has it left me coming away with a new perspective? Has it left me thinking and asking you questions? Like, ultimately, I really believe in films that do that. This is exactly what this film does. So if you're looking for something that is a real good watch, but it's not too much to follow, like you've got this small world, you've got these characters you can invest in, just dive into this film because it is really good. Now I'm going to move on to the cast a little bit here, and the cast does contain some fairly well-known actors, particularly George Mackay, who seems to be on the rise since his 1917 appearance. And if you have seen that film, you'll notice, well, personally I've found his facial expressions are incredibly emotive. You kind of see a lot through his face without him actually having to say anything. So I think, and ultimately that added to the sort of depth of the storyline. So he was a great choice. Antagonist within the film, Hugh Bonneville, he was brilliant. I've recognised him from sort of more schmaltzy, happy rom-com stuff. I'd recognised him from Downton Abbey and Paddington, and I've never really watched them, but as you can imagine, those films are a considerable jump from gory horror thriller to Downton Abbey and Paddington. So with that, there was almost some sort of skepticism about how he might portray that. But it's brilliant to see because it shows the talent that this man has, that he's able to just transition from something on the complete opposite end of the spectrum and then bring it out the bag at the other side. And it works really, really well. He's believable, he's terrifying, it's not unrealistic. So there's some really strong points within his performance that just brought the whole story together. There's a guy who I've never seen before, Percival Ascot. He was the sort of supporting actor to the protagonist, George Mackay, and his performance was brilliant. His story was kind of a subplot that was kind of intertwined throughout the main aspects of the main story, and ultimately his role in the film becomes increasingly greater as time goes on. But it's that sort of development of his character and the understanding that you have of him. You really believe in what he's trying to do. He's got a strong foundation, and it makes you really appreciate this character. These three guys were probably the standout in terms of acting, but with that, you've got these great actors and you've got a solid story. Like, it all comes together really nicely with this Netflix film. The story revolves around this sort of graffiti artist. The film begins on part of that work, and it's more so graffiti activism rather than graffiti work. And the way that the film begins, it begins with the title of the film, I Came By, and that is painted onto a wall. And what the guys do is they'll go into a really expensive house that is owned by someone who is really rich, but they're also got sort of questionable ties into certain areas, whether they're corrupted or criminal related. So they'll go in to this person's house and they'll make a point and they'll say, I came by, aka, we're on to you, we know who you are, you're not a great person, sort your shit out. So that's basically their sort of purpose or motive. And as the film goes on, that sort of changes and things happen, and it drags in more and more people when George Mackay's character stumbles across Hugh Bonneville's character. So George Mackay plays Toby Neely, and Hugh Bonneville plays Hector Blake. Hector Blake is in fact a judge. So George Mackay and Purcell Ascot, they're sort of in this vigilante team. Purcell plays Jamil, George plays Toby. And in one scene in the film, Jamil comes across this house that he's working on. He has some sort of construction job or something or other. And he sees Hugh Bonneville's character's house. He has this sort of very good guy image. He seems very legitimate. Nothing seems to be afoot. He does have some slightly creepy paintings, but other than that, but fairly standard posh rich man. Toby then breaks into the house and discovers that someone's there, which ultimately sets off a chaotic and cataclysmic chain of events that really backfire in many ways. But that journey that is set off is incredibly rewarding and satisfying because the film is made in a way that you believe in your characters, you believe in the story, and because it's got that initial foundation, you understand what the motive is, you understand why they're doing what they're doing, but it also throws in the mix of home problems. Real life is relatable, it's understandable, and that's one of the other benefits about these smaller world films, where it's concentrated on a much smaller idea, but you can really develop that and you can really make it emotionally engaging and just powerful overall. And that's the problem with some of these big blockbusters is that they just get carried away and they just spend far too much money on nonsense. The director for this film is called Babak Anvari, and I've never actually watched anything of his before this, but he definitely has some incredible storytelling abilities as evidenced by this film. Upon looking at some of the critical reviews of this film, in Empire magazine, for example, some of the performances were criticised as, in certain critical reviews of the film, some people referred to the film as being slightly blunt politically, sort of poor versus rich, whilst on the other hand, the cinematography was allegedly flat, in other words, was allegedly flat in some cases. Now, I didn't really agree with this because I feel like with a film like this, like there's only so much you can do, and also like personally, I don't really enjoy these ridiculous like sweeping movements. Like I think it's good if you've got like an opening shot or you're introducing something, but I think films these days, they rely too much on this unnecessary movement. Like you want to focus on what's happening. You don't need these slight pans or these slight tilts or these like sort of tracking shots. Like personally and stylistically, I don't really enjoy that kind of thing. I mean, obviously I enjoy it, but I don't think it's necessary. So I think to criticise the cinematography in that sense is probably a bit unfair. Without spoiling anything, we end on the same shot that we began on with I Came By in graffiti, and I think that is a really excellent way of describing the film as a whole because it's tied together really well. Personally, I found it tied together well. You might find it differently, but you got to watch to find out. Whilst we're on that, I'd love to hear what you do think of it. Please go watch it and follow the podcast for more content like this. But yeah, the ending point ends on the same as the beginning, and that really effectively ties it together. And it's not even so much that it's like cliche or whatever, but you can imagine it written down in the storyboard. I think that the way that is done, it's almost just like the end and beginning of a book, and it just works quite well. I'm unclear on the budget for this film, but I can imagine with the scale of it, it probably was just in the tens of millions at the very most. I can't imagine it definitely wouldn't have been breaking into the 100 million plus. It wouldn't have made sense. I would be surprised if it cost more than 10 million to make, to be honest, because there was pretty much no visual effects whatsoever in terms of sort of CGI. There was some really haunting horror scenes. There was a scene where someone watches a dead body. There was a scene where you see ashes in an incinerator getting flushed down the toilet. Like, there's so many little things that are done practically that deliver the horror rather than this reliance on unnecessary visuals. Nevertheless, though, I do get excited for big visual films. I think there's an upcoming film called All Quiet on the Western Front, which is a remake of the original, and it's meant to be brilliant. I've managed to find somewhere to get tickets to actually watch it before it comes on Netflix, or once it gets on Netflix, it's going to be in the cinema as well. If you're hearing this and you're in London, I recommend having a look, because I feel like this film will absolutely be worth watching on the big screen. It's going to be big, bold and chaotic, so I think if there's any excuse to go to the cinema to see a film that you might not get the chance to ever see again, it's probably going to be this one. Let me know though if you've got anything on your radar for what you want to watch, or if you're going to watch something, or if you really hated a film, if you really loved a film. I would love to hear from you. And please share the podcast with like-minded people so we can get a bit of a discussion going. But yeah, overall, I thought it was a great film. I would highly recommend it, as I've said multiple times already. But yeah, let me know if you get a chance to watch it. I will be coming back with more. I'm going to try and keep this a bit more consistent. It's kind of hard to find the time at the moment. I'm incredibly busy, but I'm enjoying doing this series. I really love it, and I've got big plans. So stay tuned for more. Keep watching, keep listening, and I'll see you next time.